Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, Chapter 8. Mrs. Jennings was a widow with an ample jointure. She had only 2 daughters, both of whom she had lived to see respectably married, and she had now therefore nothing to do but marry the rest of the world, and in the promotion of this object she was zealously active as far as her ability reached. Ambition, no opportunity of projecting weddings among all of the young people in her acquaintance. She was remarkably quick in the discovery of attachments, and enjoyed the advantage of raising in blushes and the vanity of many young lady by insinuations of the power that such a young man, and this kind of discernment enabled her soon after her arrival at Barton to decisively pronounce that Colonel Brandon was very much in love with Marianne Dashwood. She rather suspected it to be so. On the very first evening in their being together, from his listening to her attentively while she sang, and when the visit was returned by the Middletons dining in the cottage, the fact was ascertained by his listening to her again. It must be so. She was perfectly convinced of it. It would be an excellent match, for he was rich and she was handsome. Mrs. Jennings had been so anxious to see Colonel Brandon well married ever since he had connected with Sir John, just brought him to her knowledge, and she was always anxious to get a good husband for every pretty girl. The immediate advantage of herself was by no means inconsiderable, for it had supplied with her endless jokes against them both. At the park she laughed at the Colonel, and in the cottage at Marianne. To the former her raillery was probably, as far as regarded only by himself, perfectly indifferent. But to the latter it was first incomprehensible, and in its object was understood. She hardly knew whether most to laugh at its absurdity or censure in its impertinence, for she considered it as unfeeling reflection on the Colonel's advanced years and on his forlorn condition of his bachelorhood. Mrs. Dashwood, who could not think of a man 5 years younger than herself, so exceedingly ancient as he appeared to be at the young, youthful fancy of her daughter, ventured to clear Mrs. Jennings from the probability of wishing to throw ridicule on his age. "But at least, mamma, you cannot deny with absurdity of the accusation, though you may think not intentionally ill-natured. Colonel Brandon is certainly younger than Miss Jennings, but he is in enough to be my father, and even if he were animated enough to be in love, he must have long lived every sensation of the kind. It is too ridiculous. When is a man to be safe from such wit, if age and infirmity not protect him?" Infirmity, said Eleanor. "Do you call Colonel Brandon infirm? I can suppose easily that his age may be appearing much greater than you, that to my mother, but you can hardly deceive yourself as to having the use of limbs. Do not you hear of his complaint to rheumatism, and is not that the commonest infirmity of declining life?" "My dearest child," said the mother, laughing, "at this rate you must be continued terror of my decay, and it must seem to you a miracle that I have my life to be so extended in advance of age 40. "Mamma, you are not doing me justice. I know very well that the Colonel Brandon is not old enough to make his friends yet apprehensive of losing him in the course of nature. He may live 20 years longer, but 35 has nothing to do with matrimony." "Perhaps," said Eleanor, 35 and 17 had better not have anything to do with matrimony together. But if there should be any chance happen to be a woman who is single at 27, I should not think Colonel Brandon's being 35 any objection to his marrying her." "A woman of 27, said Marianne, after pausing a moment, "can never hope to feel of inspired affection again, and if in her home be uncomfortable, her fortune small, I can suppose that she might bring herself to submit in the offices of a nurse, for the sake of provision and security of a wife. In his marrying such a woman, therefore, there would be nothing unsuitable. If that would be compact of convenience and of the world would be satisfied. In my eyes, it would be no marriage at all, but that would be nothing. To me, it would only seem a commercial exchange, in which each wished to be benefited by the expense of the other." "It would be impossible, I know," said Eleanor, "to conceive that you, a woman of 7 and 20, could feel for many of 35 anything near enough to love, make him desirable companion for her. But I must object to your dooming Colonel Brandon and his wife to the constant confinement of sick chamber, merely because he chanced to complain yesterday, a very cold damp day, of slight rheumatic feel of one of his shoulders." But he talked of the flannel waistcoats, said Marianne, and with me a flannel waistcoat's invariably connected with aches, cramps, and rheumatism, and every species of ailment that can afflict the old and feeble. Had he been only of violent fervor, you would not have despised him half so much, confessed Marianne. If not something interesting to you in the flushed cheek, hollow eye, and quick pulse of a fever. Soon, perhaps this. Soon after, upon Eleanor's leaving the room. Mamma, said Marianne, I have an alarm on the subject of illness, which I cannot conceal from you. I am sure Edward Ferrars is not well. We have not now been here almost a fortnight, and yet he does not come. Nothing but real indisposition could occasion this extraordinary delay. What else can detain him at Norland? Had you any idea of his coming so soon? Said Miss Dashwood. I had none, on the contrary, and if you felt any anxiety on all subject, it was in recollection that he sometimes showed a want of pleasing and readiness in acceptance of my invitation when I talked this coming of Burton. Does Eleanor expect him already? I have never mentioned it to her, but of course she must. I rather think you are mistaken, for when I was talking to her yesterday of getting Newgate for the spare bedchamber, she observed that there was no immediate hurry for it, as it was not likely that the room would be wanting of someone. How strange this is! What can he be meaning of it? But the whole of their behavior to each other has been unaccountable. How cold, how composed of their last adieus, how languid their conversation in the last evenings of their being together. In Edward's farewell there was no distinction between Eleanor and me. It was of good wishes and affectionate bother to both. Twice did I leave them purposely together in the course of the last morning, and each time he did nothing accountably to follow me out of the room. And Eleanor, in quitting Norland and Edward, cried not as I did. Even now in her self-command is invariable, when she is dejected or melancholy. When does she try to avoid society or appear restless and dissatisfied with it?